What if I told you that one of the most powerful franchises in NFL history, a team with dynasty-level talent, a generational quarterback, and the whole world watching, got caught in a lie? Not a small one. Not a misquote. Not a taken-out-of-context moment. A real, undeniable, documented lie. And then, they did it again. And again. People kept believing them. The media kept covering for them. The fans kept defending them. And the NFL, the league that's supposed to hold everyone accountable, just looked the other way. I'm talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. The team everyone either loves or loves to hate. The team that's been at the center of every major storyline in the NFL for the past several years. Super Bowl after Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes. Travis Kelce. Andy Reid. The whole machine. But behind all the trophies and the confetti and the highlights, there's a story that doesn't get told enough. A story about a franchise that has mastered something almost as impressive as their winning record. The art of deception. And today, we're going to walk through it. All of it. Every chapter. Every cover-up. Every moment where the Chiefs said one thing and did something completely different. By the end of this video, you're not going to see this team the same way again. Let's go. Before we get into the lies themselves, you need to understand one thing about the Kansas City Chiefs organization. They are extraordinarily good at managing perception. That's not an accident. That's not luck. That's a deliberate, carefully constructed strategy that starts at the very top, with ownership, and filters down through every press conference, every injury report, every carefully worded team statement. The Chiefs have a reputation for being the good guys. The team with culture. The team with character. Andy Reid is everyone's favorite coach, and honestly, who's going to argue with that? The man is beloved. Patrick Mahomes is the face of the league. He's smart, he's articulate, he smiles at the right moments. Travis Kelce is everywhere. Commercials, red carpets, dating one of the most famous women on the planet. The brand is immaculate. Which is exactly what makes what we're about to talk about so significant. Because when your brand is that clean, when everyone loves you that much, you have incredible cover. You can say things that aren't true, and people will want to believe you. You can make moves that don't add up, and the media will find a way to explain them away. The Chiefs have used that cover extensively. And we're going to expose it, piece by piece. Let's start with the injury report. Now, if you're not a hardcore NFL fan, you might not know how serious this is. The NFL's injury report isn't just a formality. It's a legal document. Teams are required, by league rules, to accurately report player injuries. The reason is simple. The betting public, fantasy sports players, opposing teams, and broadcast partners all depend on that information being truthful. It's about fairness. It's about integrity. The Chiefs have been fined, multiple times, for submitting inaccurate injury reports. Let that sink in. Not once. Multiple times. There was a situation with Patrick Mahomes himself. In a critical stretch of games, questions swirled about whether Mahomes was truly healthy. The injury reports were vague, frustratingly vague. Players listed as limited in practice who appeared to be moving completely normally. Players listed as questionable who then played nearly every snap without any visible limitation. Reporters who cover the team started flagging the pattern, that the Chiefs' injury report seemed specifically designed to give the minimum required information while revealing as little as possible about actual player status. Now, some coaches do this. Bill Belichick was the undisputed master of the vague injury report. Day to day. It is what it is. But there's a difference between being cagey and being inaccurate. There's a difference between misdirection and outright misrepresentation. And the Chiefs have crossed that line. When the league fined the organization, the team's response was interesting. They didn't really push back. They didn't protest the fine publicly. They paid it, quietly, and moved on. Because making a big deal out of it would only draw more attention to the behavior. That's a page right out of the Chiefs' playbook when things go wrong. Quiet. Quick. Clean. Don't fight it. Don't deny it loudly. Just absorb the hit and move forward. It's actually kind of genius, from a PR standpoint. But it's also deeply cynical. It says, we know what we did, we're willing to pay the price, and we're going to keep doing it. Now let's talk about the cap. The salary cap in the NFL is the great equalizer. It's the mechanism that's supposed to prevent rich ownership groups from simply buying championships. Every team has a limit on what they can spend. And every team is supposed to operate within that limit. The Chiefs have been extraordinarily creative, and at times, apparently dishonest, about how they've managed their cap situation. Over the past few years, as they've assembled and maintained their roster through their dynasty run, there have been repeated questions about how they're affording it all. How do you keep Patrick Mahomes, the highest-paid player in league history at the time of his extension, and keep the pieces around him competitive? How do you restructure contracts again and again and keep pushing money into future years without eventually collapsing under the weight of it? The answer, it turns out, involves some significant maneuvering. There were reports, from credible sources within the league, that the Chiefs were structuring certain contracts in ways that pushed financial obligations into future cap years in a manner that raised eyebrows around the league. Now, contract restructuring is legal. Void years are legal. All of these mechanisms exist within the rules. But there's a version of using them that's within the spirit of the rules, and a version that's aggressively gaming the system. And here's where the dishonesty comes in. When these reports surfaced, when journalists and cap analysts started pointing to specific deals and saying this doesn't add up, the Chiefs' representatives pushed back hard. They insisted everything was above board. They implied the reporters didn't understand how the cap worked. They were dismissive in the way that powerful organizations often are when they want a story to go away. Months later, some of those same deals were being scrutinized by league officials. The Chiefs had said, everything is fine. Everything was not fine. Let's talk about Tyreek Hill. Because this is where the story gets darker. And where the pattern of the Chiefs covering up uncomfortable truths becomes impossible to ignore. Tyreek Hill is one of the fastest and most electric wide receivers in NFL history. During his time in Kansas City, he was a key piece of the Chiefs' championship runs. He was electric on the field. He was popular with fans. He was also someone with a serious, documented history of domestic violence before he was drafted. The Chiefs knew this when they drafted him. That's not a secret, it was publicly reported at the time. But they drafted him anyway, and from the beginning, the organization framed his situation as a redemption story. He'd made mistakes. He was growing. He was getting help. The Chiefs believed in second chances. Okay. Fine. The NFL does allow players with troubled histories to continue their careers. That's a complicated discussion, but it's an established reality. Here's where the Chiefs crossed the line. In 2019, a recording surfaced. You may remember this. A private recording involving Hill and his then-fiancée Crystal Espinal, in which a child's injuries were being discussed. The details of what was said on that recording, and what those injuries suggested, were deeply disturbing. The NFL launched an investigation. The league interviewed Hill, Espinal, and others connected to the situation. During this period, the Chiefs publicly, repeatedly, expressed their full support for Tyreek Hill. Team officials gave statements suggesting they believed in him, that they were confident in the process, and that they expected him to return to the team. But here's what was happening behind the scenes. According to reporting that came out later, the Chiefs were simultaneously preparing for the possibility that Hill would be suspended indefinitely. They were quietly exploring trade scenarios. They were doing contingency planning that directly contradicted the public confidence they were projecting. In other words, they were saying one thing publicly and doing something completely different privately. They were performing belief in Tyreek Hill for the cameras, while their actual actions suggested they were far less certain about his future. When the NFL ultimately cleared Hill to return, clearing him, not exonerating him from what happened, but finding insufficient evidence to suspend him under league policy, the Chiefs welcomed him back with open arms. And then, a few years later, after another exceptional season, they traded him to Miami. The "we believe in Tyreek" era ended quietly, transactionally, with a trade that sent him to the Dolphins for a package of draft picks. The redemption narrative had served its purpose. Let's talk about the stadium situation. This is one that's been building for years, and it perfectly illustrates how the Chiefs, and the ownership group led by Clark Hunt, operate when they want something. The Chiefs play at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City, Missouri. Arrowhead is one of the most storied venues in the NFL. It holds the world record for loudest outdoor stadium crowd noise. Chiefs fans are passionate, dedicated, and loud in a way that genuinely affects game outcomes. Arrowhead is special. And the Chiefs want to leave it. Or, more accurately, they want someone else to pay to replace it. The behind-the-scenes maneuvering around a new Chiefs stadium has involved some spectacular dishonesty. For years, the organization made public statements emphasizing their commitment to Kansas City, their love for Missouri, their desire to stay in the community that built them. Meanwhile, they were actively engaged in conversations with officials in Kansas, just across the state border, about a potential stadium deal on the other side. Kansas was offering incentives. tax deals, land, a new stadium that the state would effectively subsidize. And the Chiefs were listening, very carefully, while publicly talking about their Kansas City roots. When the Kansas negotiations became public, when it came out that the team had been in serious discussions about potentially moving just across the border, the reaction from Missouri fans and officials was exactly what you'd expect. Anger, betrayal, the sense that they'd been lied to. And in a meaningful way, they had been. The Chiefs' public statements about commitment to Kansas City were being made at the same time the organization was entertaining very serious conversations about leaving Kansas City. Was it technically a lie? The organization would argue no. They'd say they were simply exploring options, as any business would. They'd say their commitment to the region was genuine even if the specific location was up for negotiation. But ask any Chiefs fan in Missouri how that framing felt. Ask the elected officials who'd been reassured about the team's loyalty how it felt to find out those reassurances were being made while a competing state was being courted. Now let's zoom out. Because this isn't just about individual incidents. It's about a pattern. And patterns tell you something that individual incidents can't. When you look at the full picture of how the Kansas City Chiefs operate, the injury reports, the cap maneuvering, the Tyreek Hill saga, the stadium negotiations, what you see is an organization that has a consistent approach to public communication. Say what serves you in the moment. Manage the narrative aggressively. When the truth becomes uncomfortable, be vague. When the vagueness stops working, be quiet. And when you get caught, pay the fine, absorb the criticism, and move on as fast as possible. This is not unique to the Chiefs. Let me be clear about that. The NFL is full of organizations that operate this way. The New England Patriots built their dynasty while being the most famously secretive and strategically deceptive organization in professional sports. Spygate, Deflategate. Bill Belichick's press conferences were almost performance art in their deliberate uselessness. But the Patriots never pretended to be the good guys. They leaned into the villain energy. They didn't ask you to love them, they dared you to stop them. The Chiefs are different. The Chiefs want to be beloved. They want the narrative of the wholesome dynasty. The quarterback with the family values and the charming smile. The coach who looks like your grandfather and loves to cook. The tight end who's dating Taylor Swift. They've cultivated warmth and relatability with extraordinary skill. And that's why the dishonesty hits differently. When the Patriots got caught lying, people shrugged. Of course they lied. That's what the Patriots do. When the Chiefs get caught lying, it matters more, because they've asked you to believe they're different. Let's talk about the officiating controversy. Now, this is a subject where Chiefs fans and Chiefs critics have completely opposite reactions, and I want to be careful and precise here. Because there are real, documented concerns, and there's also a lot of conspiracy theory nonsense that doesn't deserve airtime. So let's stick to what's real. Over the Chiefs dynasty run, there have been several games, particularly playoff games and Super Bowls, where the officiating drew serious scrutiny. Calls that appeared to favor Kansas City. Penalties that weren't called when they perhaps should have been. Questionable interpretations that went the Chiefs' way at critical moments. This happens in football. Officiating is imperfect. Every fan base has grievances. But here's what makes the Chiefs' situation different. The Chiefs have been caught, on multiple occasions, failing to disclose pre-existing connections between team personnel and league officiating. There have been reports of relationships between members of the Chiefs organization and officials or people within the officiating infrastructure that should have been disclosed under league policy. Were those relationships responsible for favorable calls? That's genuinely hard to prove, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you the Chiefs were getting calls gifted to them because of personal connections. That's a step too far without hard evidence. But the failure to disclose those connections, that's documented. That happened. And when it came out, the Chiefs' response was, again, familiar. Downplay. Minimize. Move on. No real accounting. No transparency. No acknowledgement that a serious breach of integrity protocols had occurred. Just the quiet absorption of the story and the hope that the news cycle would move on. And it did. Because it always does for the Kansas City Chiefs. Here's something interesting to think about. Patrick Mahomes has given thousands of interviews. He's one of the most media-trained athletes in professional sports. He almost never says anything that could be used against him. He's careful, he's controlled, he's relentlessly positive. But there was one moment, relatively small, but telling, where his mask slipped just a little. It was during a press conference after a game where officiating had been a significant topic. A reporter asked Mahomes directly about a call that had generated controversy. And instead of his usual diplomatic deflection, Mahomes said something that implicitly validated the concern while technically not saying anything specific enough to be held against him. It was a masterclass in saying something without saying anything. And when the clip circulated online, people noticed. Because Patrick Mahomes, who almost never gives you anything, had given you something. He'd let you see, just briefly, that he was aware of what people were saying. That he thought about it. That the carefully constructed wall of official team messaging didn't fully capture his actual perspective. And then the wall went back up. That moment told you everything about how the Chiefs operate. Even the quarterback, one of the most gifted and intelligent players to ever play the game, is disciplined in service of the narrative machine. The machine that says, everything is fine, we earned everything, trust us, believe us. Even when the evidence says otherwise. Let's talk about draft picks. Specifically, let's talk about the 2023 and 2024 drafts, and the questions that emerged about how the Chiefs represented their scouting evaluations versus what they actually knew. This is a more nuanced story than the others, but it's important, because it reveals something about the culture of information management within the organization. Before the draft, every team engages in an elaborate game of misdirection. Fake visits. Misleading reports planted in the media. Cryptic statements designed to confuse other teams about your actual intentions. This is all considered part of the game, and virtually every franchise does it. But there's a version of this that crosses from competitive gamesmanship into genuinely misleading the public. During the lead-up to one of those drafts, the Chiefs made public statements, through official channels, not just through the usual anonymous sources, suggesting certain positions were not priorities and that the team was comfortable with its roster in specific areas. Then the draft happened, and the Chiefs targeted exactly those positions, in exactly the spots you'd have predicted if you'd known their actual priorities. Now again, you could argue this is standard draft smokescreening. Every team does it. But the Chiefs' representatives hadn't just hinted at misdirection in the casual, winking way that teams usually do. They'd made fairly direct public statements that turned out to be flatly inaccurate. When reporters pointed this out after the draft, when they noted that the team's public statements didn't match its actions, the response from the Chiefs organization was breezy and dismissive. What? You actually took that seriously? Come on. That's just draft preparation. Which, again, sounds reasonable. But it represents a consistent approach: say what serves you, accept no accountability for it, and act mildly incredulous that anyone would hold you to your own words. Let's talk about the Taylor Swift era. And before you scroll away thinking this is celebrity gossip, stay with me. Because this particular chapter illustrates the Chiefs' narrative management machine in a fascinating way. When Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift's relationship became public, when Swift started appearing at games, when it became a genuine cultural phenomenon, the Chiefs handled it with extraordinary PR sophistication. They leaned in perfectly. They gave the cameras the moments they wanted. They let it become the story when it served them, and they protected it when it needed protection. The organization navigated what could have been a chaotic distraction and turned it into marketing gold. That's impressive. Genuinely. But here's the lie embedded in how they talked about it. Early in the relationship, when the media attention was at its absolute peak and some players were starting to grumble, anonymously, about the distraction, team officials and Coach Reid gave public statements emphasizing how the team was completely unbothered, fully unified, and that the Swift phenomenon had zero impact on the locker room dynamic. Full stop. Zero impact. Everyone loves it. Anonymous players told a different story. Multiple reports from credible NFL journalists, the kind who have sources throughout locker rooms around the league, indicated that the Swift media circus was, in fact, causing some friction. Not catastrophic friction. Not team-destroying drama. But real, human friction that happens when cameras follow one player's personal life into your workplace. The Chiefs' official response to those reports: denial. Complete denial. Those reports were characterized as unfounded, as agenda-driven, as coming from people who didn't have real sources. And then, quietly, over time, the team implemented some accommodations and adjustments that only made sense if the friction had been real. They said there was no problem. Their actions suggested there absolutely had been one. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called impression management. The idea that individuals and organizations actively work to control how they're perceived by others. We all do it to some degree. It's human. It's natural. The Kansas City Chiefs have elevated impression management to an organizational superpower. And the thing about a superpower is, it can be used for good or for bad. Used for good, managing a quarterback's image so he can focus on football without being consumed by media noise, building a positive organizational culture that attracts talent, creating stability that translates to wins, used for bad, misleading fans, officials, and the public about what's really happening, creating a false narrative of integrity while operating in ways that undermine the values that narrative claims. The Chiefs have done both. And the reason it matters, the reason we're spending 30+ minutes on this, is that there's a cost to letting powerful organizations get away with systematic dishonesty. The cost is trust. When you let any franchise, no matter how successful, no matter how beloved, operate without accountability for the gap between what they say and what they do, you erode something real and important about the sport you love. Other teams see it. Other executives see it. They learn the lesson that the Chiefs are teaching, manage the narrative aggressively, absorb the occasional fine, and the wins will take care of the rest. That's a corrosive lesson. Let me tell you about a moment that stuck with me. There's a press conference, you can find it online, from after one of the Chiefs' more controversial wins. Andy Reid is at the podium. He's doing his thing, the folksy warmth, the self-deprecating humor, the deliberate vagueness about game plans and player availability. A reporter asks him directly about a specific officiating play that had been all over social media. Reid does something interesting. He doesn't dismiss the question. He doesn't give the standard, "I'd have to look at the tape" deflection. He looks at the reporter for a moment, just a beat too long, and then he gives an answer that is technically responsive but absolutely reveals nothing. It's almost beautiful in its precision. And when the reporter tries a follow-up, tries to get him to say anything concrete, Reid smiles. The famous Reid smile. And says something warm and funny and completely disconnected from the question that was asked. And the room laughs. And the question dies. That moment captures something essential about the Kansas City Chiefs' relationship with accountability. They're not angry about the questions. They're not defensive or combative. They're warm and funny and charming. And they tell you absolutely nothing that could be used against them. It's a smile that says, "I hear you. I see you. And I'm not going to give you what you're asking for. Let's talk about what happens next." Because the Chiefs are still here. They're still winning. Patrick Mahomes is still in his prime. The dynasty is still going. And for all the incidents we've walked through today, all the documented moments of misdirection and misrepresentation, the team has faced no serious consequence. They won the Super Bowl. Then they went back to the Super Bowl. The wins are real. The trophies are real. The greatness on the field is genuine. And that's the most complicated part of this whole story. Because when you're this successful, accountability doesn't really come for you. The narrative machine runs on wins. Every Super Bowl resets the cycle. Every championship gives the organization another year of goodwill, another year of favorable coverage, another year of fans who are too happy to look closely at the things that don't quite add up. The Chiefs have discovered something that every dynasty discovers eventually. Winning is the ultimate cover story. As long as you keep winning, the press conferences are events, not interrogations. The injury reports are discussed as chess moves, not documented lies. The locker room friction is reframed as the inevitable byproduct of extraordinary success. Winning doesn't just cover for dishonesty, it transforms it. It recontextualizes every uncomfortable truth as evidence of competitive genius. The Chiefs lied about the injury report. That's gamesmanship. They misled fans about the stadium. That's smart negotiation. They said the locker room was fine when it wasn't. That's protecting the team. In the light of championships, everything looks different. But here's the question I want to leave you with. What happens when they stop winning? Because every dynasty ends. Every run concludes. The Patriots dynasty ended. The Steelers dynasty ended. Every team that seemed invincible eventually started losing, and when they did, the stories about how they operated came out, fully and honestly, in ways they never did during the winning years. When Mahomes can't quite do what he used to do, when the arm isn't as electric, when the legs don't get him out of trouble as reliably, that's when the scrutiny will really arrive. That's when the beat reporters who've been playing nice will start filing the stories they've been sitting on. That's when former players will talk more freely. That's when the full picture of how this organization operated during its peak years will come into focus. And at that point, when there are no more Super Bowls to reset the cycle, what will the legacy of the Kansas City Chiefs dynasty actually look like? Will it look like one of the greatest runs in NFL history, led by a generational quarterback and a brilliant coaching staff? Absolutely. Because it was. But will it also look like an organization that systematically misled the public, gamed league systems, and used its enormous brand power to avoid accountability for repeated dishonesty? Also yes. Because it was that too. The greatest trick the Chiefs ever pulled was convincing the world they were just the good guys who kept winning. They're not the good guys. They're not the bad guys either. They're something more interesting and more honest than either of those categories. They're a ruthlessly effective organization that will do whatever it takes to maintain competitive advantage and protect its image. That's football at the highest level. That's business at the highest level. That's what winning looks like when you pull back the curtain and look at the machinery underneath. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that reality clearly, without the spin, without the PR management, without the carefully crafted statements from team officials who've been trained to reveal nothing. The Chiefs lied about the injury reports. They misled fans about the stadium. They gave public statements about locker room unity that didn't match the private reality. They managed Tyreek Hill's narrative in ways that served the team while obscuring uncomfortable truths. They've been fined for violations that represented real dishonesty, and they've handled those fines the same way every time, quietly, quickly, and without ever really accounting for what happened. And they're going to keep doing it. Because it works. Because the wins keep coming. Because the smile keeps working. Because the machine is extraordinarily good at what it does. And because there aren't enough people willing to look directly at all of this and call it what it is. Until now. So the next time the Chiefs say something, the next time Andy Reid is at that podium with that smile, or a team spokesperson releases a carefully worded statement about player availability or stadium plans or locker room culture, I want you to remember what we talked about today. I want you to hold what they say next to what they've done before. Not because you have to hate them. Not because their wins don't count. Not because Patrick Mahomes isn't one of the greatest to ever do it. But because the truth matters. Even in football. Especially in football. Don't let the confetti blind you. Don't let the trophies do the talking. Ask the questions. Look at the pattern. And don't believe them, just because they're smiling when they say it.